Hello, everyone. Welcome to the LGBTQIA in Big Law panel. I'm Jay Larry. I use he, him pronouns, and I will be the master of ceremonies for today. I'm a third year in Bracewell's M&A Capital and Capital Markets group in Houston, and I will kick it over to the panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with Alan.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alan York. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am in Reed Smith's Houston office, and I have a practice in civil appellate law. I've been practicing for 31 years.
Awesome. Drew?
Hi, everybody. My name is Drew Levisser. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am the Deputy Program Officer at the National LGBT Bar, and I lead Lavender Law 365, which is an LGBTQ plus inclusion program directed at law firms and law schools and companies. I've been practicing for 14 years, most of which at Lambda Legal as the director of the Transgender Rights Project, and I transitioned during law school. So I was the only openly transgender law student at my school, and I testified about my experiences that happened 15 years ago before the ABA about 10 years ago, and I see that some of the stuff is still happening in law firms. So I'm deeply passionate about being here with you all today and talking about how to assist you all entering big law.
Thank you. Excited to hear your insight. Anastasia?
Hi, I'm Anastasia Kaup. I'm using she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a partner at Duane Morris LLP based in Chicago, practicing corporate law with a focus on finance, and I've been practicing about 10 years. I'm a first-generation college and law student and excited to be here helping other law students.
Awesome. Michael?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Michael. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am an attorney at Littler Mendelsohn. We are the world's largest single-focused law firm that is primarily specializing in labor and employment law. I'm a 10th year attorney, and I am so excited to be here today.
Awesome. And last, but of course not least, Ariel.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to my fellow panelists and Jay for bringing us all together. My name is Ariel Adler. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm an associate in the Bankruptcy and Financial Reorganization and Creditors' Rights Group at Lowenstein Sandler LLP in our Roseland, New Jersey office. I graduated from law school in 2013, and after a mix of clerking, working in labor and employment, and then clerking again, I am now, I joined Lowenstein in fall of 2018 in the bankruptcy group.
Well, so excited to have you all here. So to provide a quick overview, today we're going to be just talking about some principles to guide your job search, how to find the right firm, navigating the application and interviewing process, and then working in the office. I will occasionally chime in and give my 2 cents on a few of the questions, but the primary focus is going to be on the conversation among the panelists. And of course, no panel with lawyers is complete without a quick disclaimer. So please keep in mind that the views expressed herein are the personal views of the panelists and are not affiliated with any firms or various organizations. So let's get started then with guiding principles. What goals do you think applicants should set as they begin their job search, especially in the current climate? Let's start with Ariel.
I think the biggest question, or the question that I would start with, and it would be, it's consistent with how I would approach, most decisions, both professional and personal, is what kind of life, what kind of experience do you see for yourself? In this context, the professional component would be, the kind of work you do, the kind of experiences you have there, but it would also include, participation in bar associations, if that's a component of your professional life that you want to grow or maintain, depending on where you are in your career. Personal, of course, includes family, alumni networks, and hobbies, which that calculus of how you balance all of that may have significantly changed given our necessary turn to almost an exclusively virtual life. what commitments are you not willing to reduce your time allotment from? And on the professional side, if you're interested or open to transitioning to a different practice area, depending on whether your priority is to go to a particular geography or type of firm, what are the considerations that you have there? How big of a practice group do you want to work with? And what questions can you ask of potential new firms to answer all those questions to your own satisfaction?
Yeah, excellent point. Thank you. Alan?
So I'm going to separate this into aspirational and practical. I think, especially in this environment, it's important to have aspirational goals as to finding sort of your perfect place. And to me, it's not unlike dating. I think that you should have a list of the must-haves and the would really likes and things like that when you're looking at different employers. And for me anyway, I think one of the top things would be examining the culture of the entity that you're going to be practicing with. That could be a governmental office, it could be big law, it could be wherever you're thinking about going. But really take the time to examine the culture of the entity, because I cannot tell you how important it is to be able to go into a place every day where you feel comfortable, where you feel like you can be your authentic self. Because when you're your authentic self, you perform better. You're going to shine more. And so I think aspirationally, those are some of the things that you should look at. Pragmatically, as starting off in your legal career and trying to find something, you're not always going to be able to hit all of those factors. And just as an example, I am in big law now. I did not start in big law. When I graduated from law school, I had some personal drama my first year of law school that affected my grades. By the time I graduated, I was not in a place where big law would look at me, to be honest. And I still knew what I wanted my practice ultimately to look at. And so if you find yourself in that situation, you know that ultimately you want to end up at big law, but you're not getting the answers that you want, revise your focus a bit. Figure out a place that you can go to practice and develop your expertise in the area that you really want to practice in. Make a name for yourself through bar activities and things like that Ariel said. Become experts in certain fields, because your legal career is not defined by where you start. Your legal career, I think, is defined by where you end up and what you have done. And so don't lose sight of the fact that there are multiple tracks to get to where you want to be. Some of them just take a little bit longer than others.
That's an excellent point. Thank you. Michael?
I have to take myself off of mute. So I think this question kind of requires to kind of think about the future, given COVID-19 and what's going on right now. I know me personally, I've been thinking a lot about kind of living in the present, listening to a lot of Eckhart Tolle, Oprah, Power of Now, New Earth. And I think one of the first steps we have to take is kind of evaluate where we are in life, right? Kind of, what are your grades like? What makes you happy? What do you want your life to look like? What do you want your practice to look like, right? And to kind of make those decisions based on sort of those critical criteria that are important to you. In my mind, there are generally 3 routes to go, and maybe some combination thereof. There's a transactional route, there's a route that's focused on litigation, there's maybe a route focused on advice and counsel. And I think you really have to do some thinking about yourself, sort of your interactions, whether you're willing to push your limits, put yourself in uncomfortable situations. For example, if you want to do litigation and you are a person who is uncomfortable in confrontation, you have to think, what is important to you? Is this something I, am comfortable pushing myself to the next level, or would I prefer something that is kind of within my, comfort zone? And I also want to kind of echo some of the previous comments where that I think you have to like kind of look at where, you know, where your grades are, right? And simply because your grades aren't where you want them to be, and you can't make that immediate transition to big law, if that is your, you know, interest, it doesn't mean that can't happen further down the line.
Precisely. Thank you. Drew?
I love this. I'm gonna just add a few things. I really appreciate the separating out the practical, because I felt like, yeah, Alan, because I felt like when I remember being in law school and it was, you know, the question was, do you want to do transactional or litigation? And, you know, like you said, Michael, thinking about your grades, these are things that are really practical, but also what I wish someone told me was that you're also going to have to acknowledge that the field that you're entering into isn't necessarily where it needs to be in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So looking at your own self and having analysis of what parts of you are privileged, what parts of you are going to be marginalized by the structures in big law, and considering that as well, that maybe I want to fight the fight. I'm going to be the first, you know, non-binary person of color who's going to be in this firm, but it's going to be different than the other people that I've spoken to at the firm because I'm going to have a unique experience. So I think adding that piece in as well, knowing that I'm up for this challenge, or maybe I'm not ready to be the first trans person at this firm because it might be really toxic. And also just, you know, including that whole holistic self-care piece that, you know, I think a lot of us who go to law school, we're like the overachievers, we're the top of the class, and then we get into this very competitive field where there's not a lot of prioritizing of how to sustain yourself and stay healthy mentally, physically, and so on. So do you want to have a family? You know, these are things I think we're going to talk a little bit more about, but like considering all those things about you as a person, and don't put those things aside.
Excellent point. Thank you. Anastasia?
Yeah, I very much agree with Alan and Drew's comments in particular. I graduated during the last economic downturn, so my comments are going to focus on the practical side of this question as well. Given the current economic climate, this is a different answer than I might offer at a different time. But at a minimum, try to find a place where you can at least tolerate, if not hopefully enjoy, practice that will meet your financial needs and some of your developmental and professional goals for now. If you're fortunate enough to have multiple options, great, but remember that where you start is not necessarily where you'll be your whole career. I started at another firm in New York practicing in restructuring. I'm now a corporate and finance lawyer in Chicago. And there was a windy, unexpected path in between. But keep an open mind and gain valuable experience. There will often be synergies. And if you can't land a position that's exactly in the type of practice, exactly in the market, exactly in the firm that you think you want at the outset, gain as much experience, training, skills as you can. There will be synergies with what you want to do. And as Alan did, as I think I did, as it sounds like Ariel did, you may be able to transition to where you want to be once the economy recovers.
And can I just add one thing to that, Jay? I mean, I agree completely with what Anastasia was saying, but I will add one other practical point. If that becomes your route, if you go somewhere that is not necessarily your ultimate goal, keep this in mind. Be exceedingly nice and professional to the people that you work with in your firm and to your opposing counsel and your co-counsel, because you never know which one of those people are going to see a spark in you and help you to find something that takes you another step on your path. You know, and I think I see this especially with litigators. You know, people get into litigation because they want the confrontation, they want to be able to fight the good fights, and that's great. But fighting the good fights professionally is different from fighting the good fights in a way that just makes people think that you're just not a great person to work with. You want everyone that you work with to think that you are the utmost professional, because they could be the step up to your next job.
Exactly. Thank you so much for adding that. So Anastasia, you kind of made a reference to this next question, which I think is going to be a good segue. Have you seen emerging trends recently, maybe just in general in the legal market or in response kind of to the pandemic, that might affect the job search? To provide context, because I know a number of law students will be listening to this panel. In general, over the past maybe decade or so, there's been an increase in the number of mergers between firms. There have been kind of varying levels of success in some of those mergers, but when you add in the effects of the pandemic, unfortunately, you've seen shorter summer programs. Unfortunately, there have been pay cuts at some firms. There have been folks who've unfortunately been let go from some firms. So, Anastasia, I'll kick it over to you.
Sure, Jay, I agree. All of those I've seen in my experience as well. Some law firms have full stop hiring freezes right now, or they're only hiring for certain high demand or busy practices, such as business restructuring, which for obvious reasons you can imagine is kind of busy right now. And I expect that that's going to make searching for a new position in a big law firm more and more challenging in the next likely 6 to 18 months, perhaps, depending on how quickly society is able to address the pandemic and the economy is able to recover. So keep in mind that although OCI, on-campus interviewing programs for second-year law students, are typically what I would call the front door into big law, there are other doors in as well. It may be that you are unable to secure a position as a summer associate and then a full-time associate through OCI, but there are now many firms that are hiring attorneys into what are called staff attorney positions, or you may be able to find another position as an attorney supporting practicing attorneys in a big law firm, demonstrate your value, gain experience, gain knowledge in the area, and then transition to the associate track. I actually know a number of attorneys that have successfully done that.
Thank you. Alan?
So I'll start off with what is probably one of the worst kept secrets in big law during this COVID crisis. Nobody knows what they're doing at this point. And no one knows what impact this pandemic is going to have ultimately on the way that the practice of law happens on a daily basis. And so I think, Anastasia, you can probably confirm this. Firms are struggling to figure out, okay, what do we do with our summer program? As an example, we changed ours to a completely virtual summer program. We kept all of our summer associates. The first 2 weeks was a boot camp where they were going through different trainings and things like that, basic trainings on how to be a lawyer, which was to some of them pretty boring, honestly, because they wanted to get in and do the work. But we didn't have any, we're struggling to just do the best that we can. We've now converted to where they're doing work assignments, but the coffees and the social activities are all virtual. And so as you're going into the search process, go in with a healthy recognition that people are doing the best that they can and struggling not only with how we deal with the summer associate programs and the incoming associates, but also with what the practice of law is going to look like when this is all over. Most big law firms that I know of are actively having conversations about when lease renewals come up, their footprint is going to be much smaller because we've now shown that we can work virtually. And so there's going to be some shift there. But then that leads to the next question. If you're doing more work virtually, how are we going to make sure that young associates have the opportunities to attend meetings with clients and hearings and things like that give them the training that they need? So I say all of that to say this. It is a constantly changing environment. Every day something new comes up. And so in terms of emerging trends, I think we see a lot of them. I think we will see more virtual working. But to Anastasia's point, if big law is where you've decided you want to be, keep abreast on what's happening, because as things change, new opportunities are going to open up. New ways to getting into firms are going to happen. And if you have the background and skills and experience to come in on day one and be able to work well in a virtual environment and things like that. Those set of assets are going to become more important as we go forward. So just try to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening, because I think that's going to open up more doors for you as time goes by.
Michael?
So I can only speak about Littler, about my firm. So, you know, we were very committed to keep our summer program going. So what we had done, similar to Alan's firm, was that we went virtual, made it into an abbreviated program. Similarly, our summer associates had, I don't know exactly for how long, but had essentially a ramp-up period. And it was even more important, even now, to develop the key relationships that you need to really boost up, you know, your career, to build those connections. Events went virtual as well. I think we had some sort of, I didn't attend it myself, so I didn't really know how it worked, but there was some sort of virtual escape room. Don't ask me how that how that played out. But I think this is a really challenging time for law students who are about to graduate, or those who are looking for a job, because it's really going to really preview what the next coming years are going to look like in terms of, you know, how are you going to make those connections and build your network with other people at this time. And in person is not happening, so how can we kind of leverage the technology we have, Zoom, I don't know, house party, whatever you use to build those connections, so that way you can also propel yourself into the direction that you want to head towards.
Great point. So this is a related question, but if you have experience searching for a job during a prolonged economic downturn, is there any further advice that you would give? Anastasia, you kind of touched on this earlier, but anything further?
Yes. As I mentioned, I was looking for a big law position at the the first or second year after the economic downturn hit, and I would make 3 suggestions. To Mike's point, reach out to your network. People want to help you. So stay in touch with, or get a list from career services at your law school of alumni in major big law firms that went to your law school, and reach out to them. Just say, hey, I don't see anything on the website. Just wondering if you know of any openings, if they're not open now, if they may be opening up soon. Sometimes attorneys inside the firm will hear about things before an opening is formally posted. This is also a great way to get some intelligence on the firm, to ask, you know, what is your practice really like, to try and ensure that if you have the ability to do so, you land in the right practice group and the right firm for you on the first try. This isn't always possible. Sometimes the sorting hat, as I would call it, doesn't make the right choice, or you don't have, you know, all the information, or it just doesn't work out the way you anticipate. That was sort of my situation. And people want to help you, though, and whether it's college or law school alumni, they love talking about their own practices. They love touting their firm. Reach out. You'll be surprised. Be creative is the second tip. I think back to the quote, think about what you can do for your country, and I would adjust that for the big law context. Think about what you can contribute to the bottom line of the business, because big law firms are businesses. They just sell legal services. And what experience professionally, or connections in terms of relationships in the business community you may have that might be of interest to the firm. And then I would also say, stay attentive. Sometimes the earliest bird gets the first worm. So be looking early and often for opportunities. The ones that are posted online, they may have applicants sending in application materials within minutes of posting. You want to be one of those applicants. The sooner you can get in front of someone with authority to schedule interviews and hiring, the more likely it is you may be selected for the position. So perhaps have you know, draft interview materials ready to go. And then as soon as there's a posting, you can, you know, revise them, tailor your approach for that specific firm or position, and then submit the materials, and you'll be ahead of the crowd.
Great points. Michael?
I know there's pauses. I'm putting myself on mute, so I apologize. So I graduated in 2010 when there was an economic downturn, and I have 2 words of advice. Okay, so one would be to develop those connections. You know, if you have an existing network, great. When I graduated, I didn't. I was the first person in my family to attend law school and to eventually become an attorney. So I think it's really important for you to kind of see what is your existing network and how you can build that, right? You might have to reach out to past alumni for informational interviews and see if that connection, that relationship can blossom from there. I mean, when you set up these informational interviews, I don't think you can expect a job is going to roll out of it, but you can really use that as an opportunity to kind of develop your goals and kind of figure out what you want. You know, for me, attending networking events, and I, you know, in this day and age, I don't know if you can really attend an in-person networking event, but they were always super awkward, especially, you know, when you're a law student or newly graduated. It's just a very, very awkward situation. I'm sure many of us can relate to that. But I think what you want to do is kind of develop genuine connections with people and just build friendships, because from that, those will propel themselves into something that is meaningful and important to you. And people can tell. People can tell that when you're speaking to them, whether this relationship you're trying to build is genuine or whether you want something out of it, right? And then if you can, I would really try to see who your mentors, your advocates, your champions can be. You know, that might be something that, you know, if you start working somewhere, that may be something that develops naturally or be assigned to you. But I do think it is important to focus on that. My second piece of advice would be to, you know, focus on getting a job. I mean, realistically, you may not be able to get a job right out of big law. I think that's just sort of the day and age that we live in right now. So I would focus on trying to get whatever experience you can, and just know that there is an expiration date on that. You know, if you get into an area of law that does not interest you, or you know, you just want to pull your hair out, just know that there's an expiration date on that for you. And your goal is to develop those really transferable skills so you can parlay that when you do apply for that dream job, right? I think in my head, and I hope in yours as well, it's, you want to think about as, how many feathers in my cap can I stick to make myself a marketable candidate, right? So if you want to work in XYZ firm and they have a big practice group, or they have a sole singular focus on a certain practice group, you may not be able to get into that firm immediately. But if you can, for example, develop the litigation skills, or maybe develop some sort of niche where that's something they're looking for and currently don't have, that's just going to make you so much more attractive as a candidate.
Jay, can I add on to what Michael said?
Mm-hmm.
I completely agree. 2 additional thoughts. One, there is an art to how you reach out to alumni or connections, and my personal philosophy is always be sincere, authentic, and grateful. People love talking about their practice. You can say something like, hey, I also went to such and such law school. I would be so grateful for just 5 to 15 minutes of your time on a call, or post-COVID, you know, meeting for coffee, and would love to hear about your practice and learn more about the firm. Even as busy as attorneys are in big law firms, I doubt you will get many rejections with an approach like that, and being sincerely grateful and open to listening and learning about them. Another idea is, I've known of a number of attorneys that went in-house, so they sought out in-house counsel positions straight out of law school, and sometimes were able to parlay that experience or client relationships into a big law position. So if you're working for a company that is a client of that law firm, and the law firm wants to deepen the relationship with that client, and they want that sort of internal knowledge that you have gained about, you know, who makes decisions and how does the business work, or what are they focused on, that can be very valuable to a firm. And also in-house attorneys often like working with other people who have that experience, so that can be very valuable. Even if it's not perhaps your first choice, it could lead to a position in big law.
Excellent point. I'll also point out that this is actually a really good time to be reaching out to folks. You know, you shouldn't feel uncomfortable, or at least try to fight through feeling shy or uncomfortable, because everyone's at home right now for the most part. They're checking their email, they're kind of looking at LinkedIn. So it's much easier, I think, at this point in time to be able to actually catch folks. So for candidates coming to big law from other areas of practice, small firms, clerkships, maybe from public interest, or from other careers entirely, how might this job search differ from what candidates might have experienced in the past? Alan, I know you said that you'd had not come through big law.
Right. So my career has sort of taken me all over the place. I started off as a briefing attorney for a court of appeals. Then I went to about a 30 lawyer firm that's solely Houston based, and then ultimately went to an appellate boutique firm where we had 4 attorneys. Then went to a Dallas and Texas regional commercial litigation and appellate firm, and then ended up at Reed Smith. And one of the things that I have learned is anytime that you're transitioning from one style of firm to another, from one, if you've had for example, a pre-law school career and you're now moving into the law, one of the best pieces of advice that I can give you is to listen more than you talk for the first time that you're there. Whatever has been told to you about the firm, a lot of it is probably true, but it's not the entire truth of the firm, because there's so much that you learn about political connections and sort of how things really get done on a daily basis that you pick up by listening and watching what you get there. So for example, I mean, when I came to Reed Smith, I went from a firm that at the current time had 45 attorneys into a firm that had 1,700 attorneys. Completely different culture. It literally took me about 3 months to even be able to sit into a meeting and understand what was being said because of all of the acronyms that the firm's culture had. And I would just sit there and nod knowingly, and then finally someone, my guardian angel, provided me with a list of acronyms that helped me to interpret all these things that I've been hearing. But culture is one thing, and working within that culture is another. They're symbiotic, but regardless of where you're coming from and what you're coming into, I guess my advice would be absorb as much as you can, because it's going to help you to find the most successful way to progress your career. Not everything is written down in a policy. You need to be observant. You need to watch what's going on. And I think that's especially true in big law, because there are simply so many moving parts. And as Anastasia said earlier, it is a business. And big law firms are run like a business, and you need to understand the mechanics of that. And so I think that would be my most key point, would be to be observant.
Yeah, an excellent point. Drew?
Thanks. Can I get that acronym sheet afterwards?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. Yeah, so I would just add that, I hear from people saying that, well, if I didn't start off immediately at big law, I don't have a shot. And I love the example that Anastasia gave about, people moving from in-house into firms, and it's always been interesting to talk to people with their experience. So bottom line, I want you to know that, you know, if you are someone who is not fresh out of law school, but you're considering this, please do, especially if you are LGBTQ+, person of color, person with a disability, and so on. Law firms are, I know, you know, I said this to Jay, but I'm just going to flag that I'm going to keep coming back to the NALP statistics. You can look at the 2019 report on diversity in US big law. On LGBT diversity, we're just doing terribly as a profession. So that's a good thing for you all, because if you're looking to get into big law, I think big law has been tuned in, it's no secret, and they're looking for LGBTQ+ talent, people of color talent, you know, so, you know, using that to your advantage to say, like, you know, as my colleague said, you know, what do you have to offer to the firm, to the business? And part of who you are is something that you have to offer. So,
and if I can just tag on to that, I agree completely with what Drew is saying, and I have a to also pick up on something Anastasia was saying about networking. We have a 1L law student that is clerking with us this summer. He's an LCLD scholar coming in. And I am proud to say that I was one of the ones that was active in recruiting him, and he is an LGBT candidate. My husband and I are very involved in the opera here in Houston. He attended one of our LGBT events for the opera. We got to talking. He was about to start law school. He asked me, to Anastasia's point, if we could meet for coffee one day, because he just wanted to talk about starting law school and getting an understanding of what it was going to be like. Very likable young man. We got along great. And I thought from the beginning he would be a great candidate for us. And so I talked frankly with him about the fact that, you know, he was going to have the right grades, and he was going to have to do all the work that he was going to have to do, but that I would help him out however I could. And so those kinds of relationships are just, they're so important. And I just completely forgot what else I was going to say that tagged off of what Drew was saying. So I'll just turn it back over.
Jay, I can probably add to this as well. So I started off my career in governmental practice. I was at the California Department of Justice before coming to Littler. And at the outset, I do want to recognize that law is a very elitist profession. Where you work entirely depends on your grades, your pedigree, where you went to college, where you went to law school. And that's unfortunate. It also depends on whether you're transitioning from a large law firm to another large law firm, or from a solo firm to a large firm, or if you're, you know, like me, coming from governmental practice to private practice. So I do think it is important to keep in mind the resilience it takes and the grit you have to develop. And if big law is your goal, to, you know, keep heading towards that direction. I know for me, I really relied on, you know, the relationships that I built. I really relied upon my mentors and the friends that, you know, I developed at the California Department of Justice, who then did, you know, parlayed and went to a big firm, and they kind of helped me get the job there. And I also think importantly is that, again, I know, and I like to echo this, in whatever job you're working in or you obtain, that, you know, may not be your eventual goal, but you really want to develop that experience, the transferable skills, so you can parlay that into really what you want to do.
Great points, thank you. So let's hear from Ariel, and then we'll kind of drive ahead to the next topic so we can be mindful of time.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you everyone for your comments. I absolutely agree. There are so many other considerations, and I think we're going to keep harkening back to that practical and aspirational goals assessment process. You know, in each step, and as you weigh opportunities that may come or cross your path with open eyes and with a genuine interest in hearing the experiences of attorneys who may be in spaces that you think you want to be. I'll speak a little bit about having come from a couple of clerkships, and not just straight out of law school, which was my first one, but a second clerkship after I had spent some time in a fairly large regional firm that I think maybe some people who have not considered clerkships yet may be a little surprised to hear. First of all, I'll note that based on my discussions with attorneys who had clerked at, in past decades, there's been a sense of change in the assessment of clerkships as an option early in your career. At one point, it may have been considered sort of, if you didn't get that big law position right away, or if you didn't get that ideal position right away, oh, I guess I'll clerk. I would like to confirm that based on my experiences in a couple of law firms and as a clerk in the federal bankruptcy court, that is not how decision makers think of clerkships now. It is a very, very valuable experience and skill set, and you shouldn't think of it as sort of a divergent career path, but a stepping stone to the ideal position, or the position you feel you may fit into best. Of course, it must be acknowledged that it's also a practical question. Not everybody out of law school will be in a position to be able to start a state court clerkship that may pay $55,000 a year when there is an offer to take a New York big law salary right off the table. So again, think about what values, what needs are important to you at that time, and know that there may be, the choice you make now is not going to define every experience or every opportunity that you may have. And to compare sort of the job search processes a little bit, for those of you who have started or served in clerkships and so are familiar with it, it can be a very structured process right out of law school, can be very competitive, but again, I would note is also a very fertile training grounds if you are open to state, federal, administrative clerkships. There are so many different opportunities if that's something you're open to looking at. You are, as a clerkship applicant, you're expected to demonstrate maybe a particular skills subset above all, which is research and writing, and to demonstrate that you are an excellent student, an excellent candidate, which is one of the easiest or most readily available indicators is grades. And it is critical to have a good rapport with the judge or judges that you're considering, or that you would like to consider you as a clerk. You spend so much time in chambers with chamber staff and any other clerks that may be working there. Culture is at least as important in the clerkship context as it is in big law firms, because your team is that much smaller. But the upshot of that is that the personal and professional mentorship and guidance that you get from the judges or judges you may serve with will serve you for life. The first judge that I clerked with officiated my wedding to my wife. She traveled to Boston from New Jersey in order to do that. And the second judge that I clerked with was critical and an invaluable mentor in guiding me to bankruptcy, which was really one of my very first interests in and out of law school. So at a firm, you're going to work with so many different people and so many different practice areas. There's so much overlap and assistance. I can speak from the bankruptcy context. We work very closely with litigation and white collar. You're going to have varying degrees of connection with people. You may not be able to shape the interactions that you have as much as working with a small team in chambers. But again, to emphasize that the clerkship is complementary to a big law career, and I would venture a career in any sector of the law. If no matter what your goals are, and that includes big law, I would encourage you to consider how clerkships may fit into that. And if you know anybody who's served as a clerk, and I will absolutely love to speak to anybody who has questions on this, to see if that may fit into your career path. And in an economic downturn, I think that's at least as an important consideration as in a more robust hiring market.
Excellent point, thank you. So just to flag for, in terms of housekeeping, we've got a good amount of material to cover in about half an hour, but we can do it. I think I'm gonna jump around with the questions a little bit more. So moving on to finding the right firm, should an applicant's expected career path influence which firm or perhaps which practice group they end up choosing? Michael?
I think the simple answer is that it depends on you. It depends on you as the law student, right? It depends what you want to do. If your goal is to make partner, to be at some large firms, it is very, very, very difficult to make partner. So that, you know, you may not want to start maybe that's where you need to start your career, so that way you can develop those connections. If you have a specialized, you know, if you're like, hey, I am so interested in labor and employment law, then yeah, maybe Littler is the firm for you because that's what we specialize in, and you know that we are really at the forefront of that. But if that's not your interest whatsoever, you know, the firm may not be a right fit. So I think it really entirely depends on your goals and sort of what interests you and kind of what drives you and sort of what is that fire that kind of pushes you along.
Gotcha. Thank you. Ariel?
I absolutely echo what Michael said and agree. In addition, I'd add that especially if you have, or you know, aspirations for partnership, or if you have, you know, other goals that require, you know, X number of years as an attorney, you know, if you want to apply to be a judge someday, or if you'd like to obtain a senior position in the public sector, for example, it's important that you remember that the careers we've chosen are a marathon, not a sprint. Whatever firms that you consider going to, whether you think you could, you know, make a run for partner there, or whether it's more of a stepping stone for experience and to build relationships there. Think about whether based on your understanding of the culture and fit and the research that you've done, that position, that experience, however long you spend there, will help you develop as an attorney and stay driven towards the goals that you've set for yourself.
Thank you. Alan?
So I echo everything that's been said, and just very briefly, I will add this. For some practices, big law may not be the ultimate the long-term destination, but it may be a stopping point along the way. I'll use my own practice as an example. Civil appellate practice, very difficult when you come out of law school to kind of start your own practice. A lot of attorneys go into larger law firms where there's a constant feed of appellate cases that are coming out of the litigation department, so that young attorneys have an opportunity to get the training and experience. And it's one of those practices that it also leaves the opportunity on the back end. If you decide that big law is not for you and you'd rather be an entrepreneur, it's a practice that you can go out and sort of hang out your own shingle and handle appellate cases on your own. So I would just say, again, it's going to be a very personal issue. I think and especially as a new lawyer, you don't know what you may think you know what you want to be when you grow up, as it were. That's going to change as your career moves forward and as you experience different things. And so just be open to the experience of you know, once you get into a firm, and ask the question, do I want to be a partner here? You know, it's more than can I, do I want to be? And as your career progresses, you'll have enough gravitas that you can make some of those decisions that are more personally based rather than a career path that you try to track out from the beginning.
Gotcha. Thank you. So how can applicants identify firms and particular offices that are LGBT inclusive and have high cultural competency outside of just perusing firm websites? Drew, I think you had some insight there.
Sure. Well, so people are probably most familiar with HRC's Corporate Equality Index, and law firms have made the best places to work. So that's an obvious list. But when I do trainings for Lavender Law 365, we talk about how the Corporate Equality Index is really a floor, not a ceiling, particularly for the legal industry. So another place to check out is, I'm hoping everybody's going to our career fair. And we have over 600 law students already signed up. We heard from Judy. But we have a Lavender Law Recruiter Benefit Index. In order to recruit at Lavender Law, you must fill out this benefit index, and we make that public to people so you can see where law firms are in each of the categories that pertain to LGBTQ+ equity. So that's another great place. I would also say that, digging in, as we've heard, getting into the affinity groups, the ERGs, and connecting with people to hear about the culture, because as many people have said now, it's not just about what policies are in place, it's about the culture. So you're going to have those interactions.
Thank you. Anastasia?
I would also harken back to the NALP, the National Association on Law Firm Placement, I believe it is, that Drew referenced earlier. There's a treasure trove of data down to how many folks are openly LGBTQ+ by office, by law firm. And it shouldn't be fatal or the absolute determinative factor if there are only one or a few folks in that office. Maybe they have a great presence, lots of representation firm-wide, but for whatever reason there just aren't many folks in that office, and you might still have a great experience there. But there is a lot of data available. It would give me reason to look a little further. And again, alumni are a great source of information, in particular if you can find an openly LGBTQ+ alum that works at the firm. They can tell you what it's quote unquote really like, because I've worked at some big law firms that had every policy that was recommended by HRC and all these other organizations, but had not so great experiences. So data doesn't tell the whole story.
Exactly. Thank you. How has being an out attorney changed since you started practicing? Alan, you had an interesting and not funny at all story.
Well, so officially, I am the old guy on this panel. As I said, I've been practicing for 31 years, and so when I got out of law school, my first year, as I said, was a briefing attorney on the Court of Appeals. So I actually entered firm life in 1990 in Houston, Texas. And things were very, very different there then. The idea of having employee and lawyer groups that focused on LGBT issues and African American issues and things like that, it just wasn't there. And so the first firm that I went to was a wonderful firm, wonderful people, but I did not feel like I could be myself and be successful in the practice of law at that time. And so when we were having a preparation conference for this panel, I told the other panelists, for the first probably 8 to 10 years of my practice, I had a big old 8x10 black and white picture of one of my female friends sitting on my desk that was my girlfriend. And luckily she was willing to go to firm events with me and things like that. In retrospect, I don't think I was fooling anybody at that firm. And it probably would have been fine, but like I said, it was just a very different environment. This is something that I was trying to remember earlier that Drew was talking about. I couldn't have imagined when I came out of law school that being openly LGBT could be a positive thing toward getting a job that I wanted. And let me make one thing clear. There is no excuse for doing the work. You've got to have the grades, or you've got to have the expertise. If you want to break into big law, you've got to meet those standards. But once you meet those standards, what differentiates you? And one of the things today that is a blessing for our community is that a lot of big law firms, once you've met those minimum standards, if you're openly LGBT+, you're a find, and you're going to be courted. And so I would not hesitate to put activities that you've been involved with in law school, whether it's outlaw or whether it's something else, on your resume, because I know my firm and I know other firms are actively looking for diverse candidates who are going to be able to come in and enrich the life of the firm and change the way that we practice law. And so that's the biggest thing that I can say about how being an out lawyer has changed over time is it has moved from being something that was to be feared, honestly, if anyone found out, to something that can be a really great asset. And I think in 31 years, if you think about how short of a time period that is, that's pretty amazing progress.
Yeah, that's a great point. Michael?
I promise I'm going to be able to get this whole unmute situation happening by the end of this panel. So I've been practicing for 10 years, exclusively in California, first in Los Angeles, and then in San Francisco. So I will admit, I've always been out. I've been out in law school. I've been out throughout my profession, and I have been practicing in an area that is somewhat very similar to today. So my experience has not changed significantly. But I think it is important to kind of note that I think us as LGBTQ plus individuals, I think it is really important for us to align with other marginalized groups in the sense of, I have, how do I phrase this? Because sometimes a gay white male, in some instances, can be no different from a straight white male. And I think that is really important to acknowledge that, we as marginalized groups should be able to be empathetic and not maybe, but just to be there for the BLM momentum that's happening right now, and all those other groups, you know what I mean? Also like Black trans people, and I do think it's really important to recognize that. And I didn't understand, I didn't articulate that the best, but I hope you understand where I'm going.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, and thank you for acknowledging that. So what thoughts would you share with applicants who are considering whether to be out or not at a new firm or on their application materials? This is one of the ones where I'll chime in. I came out and transitioned that was my senior year in college, so before law school, and of course before all the application and interviewing. And my sense very much was, I think as LGBT people the folks who decide to come out, that's such a time of emotional kind of like turmoil and upheaval, anxiety, and everything like that. So my attitude toward applying was, I'm gonna be upfront, put all my cards on the table, and to me that was just part of me being fair to the firm being fair to me. If this relationship isn't going to work and isn't going to be something that's healthy, where I'm feeling that I can be authentic, I can bring my full self to work, I can really engage and get to know my colleagues, the clients, why waste each other's time, really? So I definitely put it like in my cover letter, was like, I am like a Black trans person, and this is my deal. This is the diversity I bring. Like, I have these different experiences, and that didn't, I'm sure that might have turned some firms away, but I don't know that it had a significant impact on my application experience. So, Drew, if you will kind of chime in on that.
Well, that was incredibly powerful, Jay. Thank you for sharing that. You're trailblazing and changing the legal profession by being who you are and being an excellent lawyer. So, I want to thank you. When I was listening to the stories of the difference, and, I was thinking about some of the pain that I felt like, being the only trans person and often being the trailblazer. I still, even though we're seeing a lot more, people coming out, we still, if you look at the stats, there's a total legal closet. And that means that people don't feel safe to be who they are in the workplace, LGBT people. And, so I just want to say that, like, it is different, but it's still going to be difficult. And the people who are, you know, like trans partners in firms, they still have horror stories. I think probably everybody in this room has a horror story that we could all share, you know? So knowing that it's going to be hard, you know, I think that, you know, like Jay said, like think about who you want to be in this profession. Use who you are to your advantage, but know that you're going to have to deal with some serious bias, if not outright harassment and things that might happen in the workplace. But you're going to be a lawyer if you're not already, and this is what you're built to do.
Excellent. That's so powerful. Thank you. Ariel, would you chime in?
Absolutely. You definitely have to ask yourself, you know, as all of the previous comments have either alluded to directly or indirectly, that, you know, what are you comfortable with? You know, do you have the adequate support at the firm, either from a, you know, structural perspective, you know, are the policies that have been shared and has the culture that has been described, does that give you adequate support for you to want to put yourself out there? How little or how much are you willing to cover if the situation arises where you feel that that's appropriate, you know, for comfort or safety or whatever the considerations may be in that moment? Only you know what you're going to be comfortable with, and hopefully you find mentors and allies and colleagues with whom to whom you know you can go if you have situations that don't bear out the way that you you know, plan your best for. Also, it's important to think about for yourself as well as for colleagues how the multiple layers of diverse characteristics can bear on somebody's lived experiences. For me, I'm so very grateful to say that I've had overwhelmingly positive experiences, and being a member of the LGBTQ community has really opened up opportunities in my career that I don't think maybe I wouldn't have been in the conversation for in the first instance, to then show my skills and what I bring to the table as a professional and as the professional that I've shaped my career to be. So, you know, I bring up my wife in the first natural opportunity to do so, because I want to set the stage for the least awkward conversations that I can. That's one of my motivators in any interaction, whether it's an interview or, you know, meeting colleagues for the first time at networking events. Then the question becomes, well, how do I come out as bi? Because that's important to me. It's hard not to make the assumption that is being made about me is that I'm lesbian. So to the extent it's important to you to come out further, do you, and how? Then I'm also a new parent. Our 4-month-old son has really changed everything. How do I come out as a parent in a same-sex relationship? You know, do I, and what is the best way to do that? And then this is something I grapple with often now, especially I find it in virtual interactions. How do I come out as a non-gestational parent? You know, it's, again, my personal motivation being, how do I tee up the conversation so as to avoid awkwardness and to really try to give the conversation counterparty a fair shot at not feeling like they've really put their foot in it. You know, overwhelmingly people are well-intentioned and just want to show interest in your life. So all of those considerations definitely come to bear in deciding whether to be out at a new firm or in any situation or interaction at that firm.
Yeah, excellent.
Jay, can I add on to one thing right there?
Well, let's hop to Michael and then come back.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll make it really fast. I have nothing to add to what Ariel just so eloquently said.
So the only thing I was going to add was in making these determinations, and especially if you're considering a specific firm, one practical tip that I would suggest is, as you're going through the interview process, ask to talk to the leader of that firm's LGBT inclusion group, and ask to speak to an associate who's a member of that group. And ask practical questions. Ask questions like, how often do you meet? What activities do you do? Because some firms have the group, but the group does nothing. Others have groups that are actively and entwined into the life of the firm. And the more you want to be able to live authentically in your professional life at a firm, the more important it's going to be to find a firm where that is not just accepted, it is embraced. And you can only find that out by asking people who are experiencing that on a daily basis.
Alan, I have a quick question for you. Do you
Sure.
think the timing is important, whether during the interview or perhaps after you get the job offer, when you bring up, what are the affinity group options? Is there a concern that if you bring it up too soon, that they may not see you as a serious candidate?
So, Michael, I would say that it matters a little bit about what you're looking for and how your qualifications meet the skill set that the firm is looking for. If you have the feeling that the firm is genuinely interested in you, I would ask the questions right up front. But I think you have to be careful of if you're sort of, you don't want to play that card thinking that that's going to get you somewhere that you don't have the credentials to get. And I don't mean that to sound harsh, but I think that in big law, there really isn't a substitute for whether it's the grades or it's the clerkship or it's the experience. There's something specific that those firms are looking for. But I would never not ask the question for fear of being kicked to the curb, because if you're going to get kicked to the curb for asking the question, it's probably a place you don't want to be.
Exactly. And sorry if you can hear the folks trim the lawn outside. So moving on to applying and interviewing. Now that you've been practicing for some time, if you were to look at a different firm to join, would you change the way that you approach the interview process, and how? And let's go to Michael.
Interviewing is it's such an awkward experience, right? So the question is whether or not, or how would I approach the interview process? And the way I've always approached interviews is to try to my best to connect with the interviewer and to kind of develop that connection, because I think ultimately, if you can get your foot in that door for that initial interview, they probably have already vetted you in terms of qualifications, and they're at some sort of the spectrum at this point in making that initial determination whether or not you would be a good fit, whether or not this is someone, whether I know we can work well together, especially if it's in a small practice group or maybe a specialized area of law. So I would focus on that, right? Just focusing on that human to human relationship connection with your interviewer.
Gotcha. Ariel?
I guess I would just add, make sure that you give, due recognition and credit to the experiences that you've had thus far in your life. You've probably interviewed with places and with people with whom you didn't feel, that rapport, that connection. In addition to looking at how you could change the process based on what you learned there, make sure you trust your gut. And I think maybe that's a benefit of having, been out in the workforce longer, whether in the law or otherwise. When you're getting the good feeling from an interaction with a potential employer or potential colleagues. Trust that you've done the research and then, make the decisions, narrow your choices with due credit to your own feelings.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. So how can candidates field interview questions that may be based on heteronormative or cis-normative assumptions? Anastasia?
Sure. I'll start this response by saying, being a woman of a certain age with short hair, certain assumptions are usually made about my identity right off the bat, and that are not made about my wife's identity, who has long hair and wears dresses. But I have been in situations where certain heteronormative or cis-normative assumptions have been made. My recommendation is to kind of play it off as if someone accidentally called you by the wrong name and just sort of move on. Like, oh, such and such, where does your husband work? Oh, actually, my wife works at such and such, and then just move on. And I found that approach to work really well, to not make a big deal out of it, but to correct the person so they sort of know, oh, I made the wrong assumption there. Both parties can just move forward in a productive fashion.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you. And let's go to Drew.
Sure, same question. Yeah, so yeah, I love that, Anastasia, and I think I would also look at that moment. I like the way that you said you would do that, and I would use that moment to kind of gather information that you're interviewing them back on how they handled that. I think you see the shame spiral, you see that they don't care at all and that they're plowing through. That's information that you're there to gather. So.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think sometimes people just kind of say things and don't understand what they said, or maybe don't didn't mean to make that assumption or draw that conclusion at all. But I would echo Anastasia's point. It is very important to clarify that so that people aren't just walking around with the wrong the wrong information. So if I think a pretty common strategy for candidates is to look at the firm's website or kind of word of mouth, try to figure out information about the culture or the benefits of a certain firm. If there's something that's not on the website, or there are just kind of lingering questions, what are a few tactful ways to gauge if that's a red flag? So for example, if a firm is not ranked on the corporate equality index, or if they have an 80 or like a 90%, as opposed to you look at other firms and you see a row of 100% scores. What are a few tactful ways to try to figure out, like, do I need to be concerned, or is this did they just not turn in the application this year? Let's go back to Drew.
Sure. So yeah, I think that I wouldn't assume if they didn't get the best places to work with HRC that they're not the best place to work. They could be, but they might just need to have some of their stuff in order. Maybe they have a better culture, but they don't have all the policies to check off. So you don't know. You got to dig in. You got to have some conversations, ideally with people who are inside, to kind of get that information that you really need. If you don't, you're not the stage, and I think people made the point about timing is important. If you're not at that stage where it's safe to kind of dig into that, the National LGBT Bar is a great resource. Darcy Chemnitz has been an executive director for decades and literally knows every firm in AmLaw. So you can get information in the LGBT community. Lavender Law Conference is a great place to do it. And I'll just put another plug in. If you see any issues, even at your law school or in your firm, the Lavender Law 365 program, it was created to start addressing that directly. Let me address the issue. I'm happy to do it so that you don't, and you could continue on your path. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, great point. Yes.
Do you mind if I echo a pitch for Lavender Law?
Sure. Yeah.
I was fortunate to get my first position at the first large law firm I worked at through Lavender Law, and it was really eye-opening to get a sense of what the elevate, I'll call it an elevated status quo. So for those firms that are aware that LGBTQ plus diversity and inclusion and representation is important, to see what law firms were doing, and whether or not they recruited at LavLaw was not the be all end all, but certainly helped me as a candidate who didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but knew what I didn't want. Helped me to narrow my search. So I would definitely encourage any students who are here, hopefully you are participating in the virtual Lavlaw Career Fair. Learn as much as you can, talk to as many people as you can through the virtual interfaces that the LGBT bar is providing during the conference. The Career Fair is a wonderful resource, and Career Fair is open to diverse candidates. There are many of them either put on by local bars or national bars and affinity bars. So please do take advantage of those. You can learn a lot from the people you meet there.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Thank you. Michael?
So about the career fair, I would like to also mention that I think it is important for you as a law student or even a lateral that when you're approaching the people at the table or virtually or however that's working with the career fair right now, I'm not quite sure, is that you try to really approach it in a way that's very genuine and not with the mindset of what can you do for me. I know I was part of the career fair last year and I helped a law student get a job at Littler, kind of like funneled interviews for her and her resume around. And for me, that was really important because we connected at a very human level, but at the same time, I had other many candidates just kind of, it was very transactional and we didn't develop that. So if you really want to make the most of the career fair is to really I think approach it from a very genuine mindset. And to answer your question, Jay, so getting back on track, I think what Drew said was right. And then setting up the informational interviews so that way you can kind of get somewhat of a candid response, or if you're working with a recruiter, sometimes you can use that recruiter as an additional layer to get more information that maybe perhaps you may not be comfortable to ask.
Thank you. So how can candidates ask their firm to consider more inclusive policies? I'll share a little bit of my experience and sort of the context behind it. As I mentioned earlier, coming out, for me at least, it was an experience of really accepting myself and learning to, using that pride in like, wow, like I love this about myself, and using that to kind of give me a voice and say, okay, I need to ask for what I want. If there aren't already policies in place, then the worst they can say is no. But so when I moved into law school, I was very much like, we don't have all gender or gender neutral bathrooms. Is that something you'd be willing to explore? It was. And moving to my firm, trans inclusive healthcare insurance policies weren't there in the beginning. And I found that if you give people the opportunity, and if you flag something and you say, this is important to me, is that something that you would be willing to look into? A lot of the time, they're not going to say no. So I always want to flag that and say that, so that people don't feel, or maybe feel a little bit less afraid, a little bit less uncomfortable bringing it up. But Drew, let's get your thoughts.
Sure. I'm working with a lot of firms right now to help them change their policies. And for example, Oric just rolled out a gender inclusive policy and had me come speak. So we're a resource, again, the Lambda Law 365 program. But I think what you just said, Jay, is really important, that a lot of times people are just so busy, they haven't really looked at the checklist, or the right people aren't in charge of the recruiting to know to look for that. So that's the work that we're all doing. And I feel like it's something that we're all, as LGBT attorneys and law students, responsible for, is to check to see how is it doing? How are we doing on this at my firm, in my workplace, at my law school? Because we need to make it better for the people that come behind us. So I think, it's not just that people had, something against LGBT people, they just maybe don't know that they need to adjust their policies. And there's so many resources to get that across the finish line.
Exactly. Anastasia?
I completely agree. I'll just add that firms are, the firms I've worked in at least, are reactive creatures. So sometimes they may not detect or see a need, a business need, or have an incentive to change a policy unless and until someone comes forward and says, actually, I'm trans. And then they're like, oh, my goodness, we don't have any trans policies. We need to evaluate this. And I actually am aware of one of the firms that I worked at that put in place trans-friendly health and other policies once they knew they had a trans staff member. So again, data and HRC scores don't always tell the whole story. Sometimes there just hasn't been a need to address it quite yet.
And if I could just add to that great point, I've heard from several firms now who said, we don't have any trans or non-binary people here. And I did know, in fact, that they do have that. So that's a problem because, you know, self-ID is one of the things that we're talking to people about, is that you have to count people. You have to allow people to be counted. But regardless of that, do not wait until somebody transitions. Do it now to have in place, because you're missing talent all the time who are going to skip right past your firm because they say, oh, they don't have their policies in place.
I completely agree, Drew. I actually limited my search to firms with 100 HRC score. And before I knew any better, I mentioned I was a first generation student, but I figured if they didn't have 100 at the time, there must be some reason, or I wouldn't have a bad reason, or I would have a negative experience. But it's not always the case with all firms, you know?
Precisely. Let's go to Michael.
I would say you really want to focus those discussions with key people. You know, I don't know if it necessarily makes sense to just raise it to anybody. I think you want to, like, if you want to get something done, if you have a goal that you want to achieve, you really want to have those discussions regarding these issues concerning yourself with people who can actually make a difference within the firm, right? So that may be the managing partner, that may be the leadership within whichever affinity group in which you belong. So I would focus those conversations on the decision makers.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Alan?
So I would echo Michael's point. I know that at Reed Smith, again, we have a very active business inclusion group, PRISM, that addresses LGBT plus issues. And we've been able to, for example, we have in process right now a declared pronoun policy that will include on our intranet anyone who declares their pronouns those. It's been an interesting process, I will tell you, because it has been a completely educational process along the way. Because of the power structures that there are considerations of things like, okay, how far do we roll this out? There will be some who don't believe that they want to or need to declare their pronouns. How are we inclusive of the beliefs and thoughts and feelings of everybody? And so it's been an educational process, but we're in the process of getting that policy through, working through PRISM. And we're also in the process of developing a policy that will help to educate mainly partners who are sending LGBT attorneys to other areas in the world, because we're an international firm. You know, what considerations do you need to take into place for countries where LGBT rights are not established, and in fact could be harmful to an LGBT attorney? And so if you're in a firm that has a real commitment to this, there should be hopefully a structure in place that you can get these ideas in place. And I do think, to Drew's point, many times even firms who are trying to do the very best that they can, who are at the forefront, we've missed things. And so sometimes it's a matter of someone raising their hand and saying, hey, have you thought about this? And if it's you know, hopefully it's a situation where someone says, no, we didn't. So let's think about it now. But we're seeing more firms that have that culture. And I think it's an amazing thing to watch.
Agreed. So let's move into, you know, working in the office. And as a preface, we want we want this panel to be, and I think all the insights and advice has been very uplifting and hopeful, but also pragmatic. And this is just kind of one of the things that we, I think, need to acknowledge. So with that, the next question: have you had an experience in the office that revealed behavior that did not align with a firm's stated policy of inclusion? If so, how did you react, and how would you advise people kind of handle that kind of situation? Anastasia.
Yes. I was practicing in a smaller specialized practice of a big law firm in very progressive, very diverse New York City. This was a few years ago. The firm had an overall very positive LGBTQ plus reputation. They were doing some amazing pro bono work for a number of LGBT groups, but all of the LGBT attorneys except me were concentrated in another practice area. And at the time, I took the job in the practice where there was a job opening because it seemed interesting, the people seemed nice, and it was 2010. So we were all taking whatever jobs we had available to us. But the fact that there were no LGBT folks in that practice group probably should have been more of a red flag to me than it was, or at least given me pause. And the culture of that practice group was very different from the firm overall. One day, so there was a senior partner in the group. He knew I was the only openly LGBTQ plus person in the practice group. Was standing outside my office with the door open. This was around the time that the one of the sets of LGBT marriage cases were under consideration in the Supreme Court. So people were talking about it. He commented to another partner that he was very much against marriage equality, that he didn't think LGBT people should be able to get married or adopt children, and just went on this very discriminatory verbal tirade within earshot of me, and he knew it. And it was overt, it was discriminatory, it was dismaying, and at first I wasn't sure what to do. I was a junior associate. I didn't have the benefit of the years of experience and a little more seniority that I do now. So I consulted with some of the other partners I knew in the LGBT group and the other practice group, raised concerns about the situation. Ultimately, I determined that the culture of the group was more like him than like me, and it was not likely to change. And since I determined I almost certainly wouldn't have a fair chance to progress my career if someone who was so vehemently anti-gay was in charge of the department and promotions, I determined I needed to transition and sought to transition to a different practice group within the firm, but that's often an economic and politically fraught sort of request. So that wasn't possible, and ultimately I decided to leave the firm.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I'll pass it to Ariel, but not before I mention that, I think your career is obviously like very, very important. However, I do not underestimate I can't overemphasize how important it is for you to be fair to yourself, even in making decisions that are going to affect your career. So if you find yourself in a situation like that, and you're able to make a move and you decide that that's what you need to do, then I hope you'll give that very serious consideration. Ariel.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I'm very fortunate, and I know I'm certainly lucky to be able to say that my experiences have been overwhelmingly positive. But it's humbling and disturbing to hear from friends and colleagues how broad the range of responses and treatment, and not only hurtful offhand comments, but intentional dismissive and hurtful comments and actions that we may be aware or not aware of still occur, and do occur in the various places we work. I have encountered, to Anastasia's point about, law firms being, some being reactive and really conservative and risk averse, on an inquiry that I made to a law firm about the possibility of them developing an employee resource group for LGBTQ plus attorneys. At the time, the firm, which otherwise I had thought had cues of being very progressive, had responded that they did not have a critical mass of gay and lesbian attorneys such that it would make sense to form an employee resource group, which, even being, just out of law school, struck me as the wrong framework for that. If you aren't, it shouldn't be reactive. And if you are really a progressive and aware employer, you should know that you want to create the environment that you want to bring these excellent candidates to, not the other way around, not put the burden on the people who identify as members of a diverse community to demonstrate the business reasons, the benefits of the firm then making a space for them and for the rest of the, for their colleagues to then have positive interactions. It's not just for members of the community, but also for the rest of the firm to see how the firm prioritizes inclusion. And certainly to a point we made previously, the policies and the structures are only as good as the individuals and colleagues who internalize what the policies are intended to do. They are floors, not ceilings, of how we should approach treating our colleagues.
That's an excellent point. Thank you so much. Alan.
So I personally, at the firm that I'm with, I have not experienced any situations like that. However, I will say that I've had, for example, conversations with associates who, while they haven't experienced it, they're struggling with sort of how out they can be, and most especially, we have a very progressive and inclusive firm culture within the firm. It then becomes a separate question when you're at lunch with a client and the client asks the question that Anastasia was asked: what is your wife's name? And do you go forward with the client and say, well, actually I have a husband and my husband's name is such and such. And so within the legal profession, I think it's one of those things where we have both the insular community of the firm itself, and then we're servicing our clients on the outside of that. And I raise that mainly to say that I think it's something that people should keep in mind. When you find the firm that feels like a home to you, it's a conversation that you should probably have openly, because I think it's important. I think it's something that you need to make sure that you have the support of the firm in truly being your authentic self. For some of us, like myself, it's very easy for me because when I introduce myself to a client, generally I figure out some way to bring out the idea that I lead our PRISM group, which is our LGBT business inclusion group. It's a really easy way to get it out there, but that position that I hold makes it easy for me, whereas it's very difficult for someone who is a first or second year associate in the firm to feel that same comfort. So use the resources that are there, feel out where it's going to be comfortable so that you can kind of figure that out along the way.
Thank you. And Michael?
I've been very lucky with my professional experience, having worked at the California Department of Justice and now at Adler, where I haven't had any in-office experiences that didn't align with my beliefs or with the firm policies. But I will say it would not necessarily be uncommon taking this outside of the office. For example, I just very recently had this very contentious deposition, and opposing counsel, plaintiff's employment attorney, an older straight white male, his style is very contentious, and he had told me sort of when he's going on his tirades that, hey, don't get your panties all bunched up. And that was in relation to my sexual orientation, since I am an attorney. It's obvious from my firm profile. So I think in situations like that, where it's outside of the office, I think you just have to deal with grace under fire and professionalism, because, you know, in an instance of a deposition, it's all on the record, and know that there are sort of like legal procedural mechanisms to get that taken care of. You should, you know, maybe speak with your colleagues, with partners or the managing partner to see sort of, you know, how to handle that sort of situation, right? If you have leadership in affinity groups, or if you have some sort of LGBTQ plus affinity group in the firm that you will be joining, then I think those are conversations worth happening, because these sort of unpleasant interactions, you know, may not necessarily be uncommon.
Thank you. So I think this is going to be our last question, and I think it's a really good one. Alan was kind of driving us here earlier. Are you out with clients, and why or why not? And of course, it's case by case. I will flag that I think it's a little bit different based on the conversations that we've had earlier. Alan was saying, you know, you can have that conversation where, you know, you just kind of, and I think Anastasia as well, you correct someone and say, oh, well, my husband, or oh, well, my wife. That seems like it would come up a little bit more naturally than like, so your sex assigned at birth, what's going on there? So I mean, you know, that to say, I have never had a conversation with a client where I've had to, you know, where I've had to come out. However, like on my resume, on my LinkedIn profile, it's all LGBT groups and, you know, National Trans Bar Association. So I think people could make the cognitive jump there, but you know, I've not had that conversation before, but I do think that at least the clients that I've had a lot of interaction with are like very progressive and open-minded. This comes back to Alan's point about you know, starting to practice in Houston in the 90s. Things have changed a lot, I think, not all in all the ways that we would hope, but the culture has kind of changed to, at least my perception is that it wouldn't be a huge deal. People might not know everything and they might have questions, but I don't get the sense that they would be invasive or rude. So that said, let's kick it back to Alan.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, like I said, I mean, I think it's situational to some degree. I mean, I am, but I also say this from what I know is a place of privilege. Michael mentioned a few moments ago that, you know, sometimes there's not always a huge difference between a white gay man and a white straight man, and that's absolutely true. I think that as a I'll say middle-aged white gay man, I make it a point every day to make myself distinct. I don't lose an opportunity to correct wife to husband, to make sure that people know affirmatively that I am out and proud and gay. Because I personally believe that is how we change perceptions of those around us. The more we talk about it, the more non-unusual it becomes. And so I think it's important, but that's from the mindset of someone who is nearing closer to the end of their career than to the beginning of their career. And so I think it has to be situational. And when we start off talking about aspirational versus pragmatic considerations, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're making a big issue of something prevents you from being able to get the work to do for a particular client that could advance your career. That doesn't mean that you should stay in a place that you have to suppress who you are on a regular basis. So it's not an easy question. I think it's one that requires open discussion and balance. And again, I think when you're generally dealing with a partner lead who would have the client relationship, I think it's a worthy conversation to have. You know, look, what is this client like? How open can I be? You know, I just think those are worthy conversations to have from the outset, so that you know, and so that you don't create a problem for yourself that you might be able to avoid. Which I hope doesn't sound like me saying going back into the closet. It's just, it's a really nuanced balance, I think, in this profession.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Ariel?
I would just, confirm, Alan, from the perspective of someone who is certainly on the more junior end, that as much as I make it a point, and I'm happy to have these conversations about being out, as soon as naturally possible with people, it is a challenge when it comes to clients. I want to be an excellent attorney, and I know that a significant part of that is navigating the client relationships, both internal and external. So knowing that partners have the relationships with the clients, and the considerations inherent in that are definitely challenges sometimes, and require a lot of introspection on my part, but also having an open dialogue with the partners. Again, to confirm that where you work and the relationships that you have with the people you work with are motivating you in the development of your career. So I certainly echo those sentiments from where I am in my career.
Thank you. Anastasia?
Sure. I have two anecdotes here. One is just to flag that for some of us, based on our appearance, people make certain assumptions about our membership in the community, and we cannot really avoid those assumptions or this sort of topic of discussion if we want to or not. Earlier in my career, I had a very much more stereotypically masculine presenting appearance and haircut. I went to an event with some senior partners and clients. I was wearing a business suit and a necktie, and I looked very much like a clean-shaven man. And one of the partners said, "Oh, hey guys, there's this guy here who wants to talk to us." Then I opened my mouth and immediately had to have sort of a corrective conversation, like, "Hi, my name is Anastasia," which is also a very feminine name. So keep in mind for the gender binary and sort of folks who present in a way that does not afford like assumed straight privilege or something like that, that you may be confronted with these discussions earlier and more often in your career than others may be. The other anecdote I'll just share is that sometimes mentors, sponsors, or partners will look out for you. I actually had one partner once reach out to me and say, "Look, I'd really like to staff you on this matter for client X, but I want to warn you that I know that a member of the senior management team is a giant homophobe. I don't think that they would probably treat you any different, or you wouldn't enjoy the work, or you wouldn't get a lot out of it, but I want to make sure you're comfortable before I staff you on this. If this isn't in your comfort zone and you'd like another opportunity, I will make sure that we get you on another deal with just as great of experience." And I appreciated that. To Ariel's point, if the client gets to know you as a great attorney and then finds out, "Oh, you're trans, you're gay, whatever," in my experience, it's almost like they don't even care. And you can be one of those folks that they know in their life, like, "Oh, I had certain assumptions about LGBTQ folks before I started working with Anastasia. Now that I've worked with her, all I care about is that she's a great lawyer." And that's sort of the ideal position from my perspective, is they care about the substance, and either we address positively or we don't even really address my personal life.
That's an excellent point. Thank you. So we'll kick it to Michael and then try to wrap up and give some final words of advice.
I think since the outset of the panel, I've really emphasized the importance of the genuineness of the relationship with the client and with those around you. So I think this is really where it comes into play, where for me personally, I'm sort of at a level in my career where I have my own clients, and I do have sort of independent relationships with clients that are not my own. And if we're talking about our personal lives, I've never had like an explicit conversation. "Hey, by the way, I'm gay." But I mean, it comes up in the context of sort of relationships, experiences, activities, groups in which I belong. So for me, that seems like much more of a natural, comfortable, genuine way to be out to a client. And as I think, was it you, Jay, who said that from your public social media presence, you put it out there. So it's not being kept a secret, but for the same reasons, for example, I don't think you need to, just come up and tell someone, hey, I'm red-handed or whatever. It may not be, depending on who you're speaking with, it may be sort of a little bit unexpected or abrupt. And I do really think it is important to sort of have that very genuine, organic relationship where if it comes up, be honest, but if it doesn't come up, then it doesn't come up. Maybe it's not relevant to that pertinent, relationship at that time.
Exactly. That's a great point.
Can I say one quick thing on this?
Sure. Yeah.
So I just want to let folks know I've had firms ask me during trainings, what do we do if a client doesn't want to work with someone who is LGBTQ+? And the response is there's very clear law that what if they don't want to work with women? What if they don't want to work with immigrants or person of color? So your employer doesn't get to discriminate in this way. So I just want to make clear to people who are hearing these stories and, with Anastasia's point that maybe they can't hide and appear to be heterosexual or cisgender, that you still belong in big law and you should be on the same career track as everyone else. And the reality is that's not the case right now. And so, these are pioneering folks who are doing something about it.
Yeah, thank you so much for making that point. So I wanted to thank you all so much for being on this panel. I think it was really informative and helpful. If you care to share maybe 15 seconds of final advice, let's start with Alan.
My advice would be, given everything that's going on, be hopeful, be happy that things are moving, but be prepared to continue to face some struggles. Drew mentioned this earlier. It's getting better, but it's not perfect yet. So just be prepared that your career path may be a bit more challenging than others, but that's okay because the battles that you're fighting today are going to help those that come behind you.
Ariel?
I would just share that, everyone, good luck in your job search or transitions into, if you're looking for a new position, whether in big law or otherwise. I would hope that you find a place that not only checks all the boxes that you require in order to have the professional and personal life and experience that you envision for yourself, but also realizes that no matter how progressive, they understand the obligation to continue to improve. I talked about being fortunate about my positive experiences and having worked in places that are wonderfully supportive, including Lowenstein. What I think is most affirming for me that this is the place for me is that we constantly have conversations about how do we support those who are still falling sort of between the cracks in terms of being seen and being developed into the careers that they want. So I would encourage you all to continue to ask yourself these questions. Are you happy, and what kinds of changes, either in the firm that you're at or somewhere else, could help you, reach your goals.
Anastasia?
I would say work is important, but remember there's more to life than work. Take it from someone who had to learn the hard way, getting hospitalized for overwork. Big law can be a great experience. It can provide you with great training, professional connections, and all of that. But there's a lot of variation in big law. There's an American Lawyer 200 ranking with 200 options just right there. But take care of yourself. Focus on health and your personal relationships and things that bring you joy every day. Get a lot out of your career, but remember there's more to life than work.
Michael?
you should determine whether or not big law is for you. Big law can be challenging, and Anastasia, I feel like you kind of left us hanging on that overworking issue. I'm very curious, but you'll want to speak with people and consider where you want to be in a couple of years. And, you know, to the law students out there, if you do have an interest in labor and employment law, do not hesitate to reach out to me. You can email me. It's mhui@littler.com, and I'm sure it's somewhere on that screen you're looking at right now.
Andrew.
Sure. If you want it, get it. You belong in big law. We need to see more women, people of color, LGBTQ plus people, particularly trans people. Pave the path, get what you need along the way, and bring people along with you. We're here to help.
And I guess I will close out, echoing Rickard, here to help. We know that this is a very, very difficult time in general for everyone. If you are looking for a job, if you have questions, if you're worried, anything like that, please, please, please do not go through it alone. You can reach out to the LGBT section of your city or state bar. You can reach out to one of us. We are here to help you, and we are rooting for you. So there's really no reason to feel like you have to shoulder any burdens by yourself. So please reach out. So with that, I am Jay Larry, your MC for today, and I guess that will bring us to a close. Thank you so much for joining us.